Hello and welcome. It's time for another review for the Magnus Protocol. This is our last episode before we get another break, episode 20. And before we get into the actual episode itself, I did want to definitely mention I saw some comments that were made in the previous episode that I wanted to highlight. And again, as I specified in the comments of last week's episode and should have said out loud, I am not an expert on alchemy. I am trying to learn more because I will be doing a full episode review, I guess, as it were, of alchemy and how it's being used so far in Magnus Protocol. We have a couple weeks break, so we'll be talking about alchemy because it's also used in the ARG, and that'll lead into a discussion of the ARG. So we will be talking more about alchemy if you were interested, but I am not an expert on alchemy. I am not an expert on Sir Isaac Newton, but I did want to mention two major things that were brought up. The first one is the Tree of Diana that was brought up in multiple comments. Diana's tree. This was a big blind spot for me. I didn't even know this tree was an actual thing that had been referenced in alchemy before. And of all things, when I mentioned last week that I was missing something when it came to Homburg, I knew I was. Wilhelm Homburg, he was the one that gave the quick method to be able to construct, create, to transmute the Tree of Diana, Diana's tree. Really, really cool. Isaac Newton, also a student of alchemy. Not a huge stretch to think that in studying Homburg's research that he would find the quick method to be able to make it. Which also, just a quick little thing, in 1967, there was an experiment at the University of Seattle where they tried to create the tree themselves, and there was an actual reaction between the solid copper and, I'm trying to make sure I'm reading it so I don't mess any of this up, the solid copper and the aqueous silver nitrate. The silver ions reacted to form a crystal structure, not crystalline, crystal, and the reaction continued until the concentration of silver ions was exhausted, which is super cool. Just wanted to call that out. And the second thing I wanted to mention that was referenced, and is going to come up again here, is that Hooke was very involved in the reconstruction following the fires of London, the Great Fire of London, and more specifically, we're going to see that that's probably what the protocol was. I thought it was some fancy mind wipe thing. It's probably just, hey, go burn it down. But anyway, on to the episode. So, episode 20, Social Stigma. The classification number, I forgot that word for a minute, is CAT 1RA B253-4-120-42024-120-42024, which is really interesting that it's then we have transformation tattoo, social media influencer. And so yeah, this is an Ink Soul episode, and I'm really excited to talk about Ink Soul. There is a lot in here. It's probably not going to be as long an episode as last week, but that's okay, because what is in here is really good. So this episode starts with Sam taking Alice and Celia to the break room, away from the computers, but not the CCTV, which is still able to pick up the audio. And we hear that Sam got an email from somebody with information about Starkwell and William Price and GSR Security in 1999 and how they burned down the Institute. Sam connects the dots, and it's wonderful to have Sam connecting the dots as well, because obviously this was the protocol, right? They enacted the protocol. Starkwell, now Starkwell, at the time GSR Security, enacted the protocol, and the Institute burned. Alice immediately gets panicky, trying to warn him, he's gone too far. This is going to go poorly. She even brings up Colin. And then Celia says that she's not so sure the Institute didn't deserve it. Which, again, makes it seem like she could be our Celia, or she could be a different Celia from a different universe where the Institute also deserved it. Anyway, all of this ties in to just the idea that the protocol is still a thing they can do. that Starkwell works for the OAR, as we already knew, and just will do that. They will just go in and purge. And yeah, maybe nowadays there's less fire, but it seems like fire has been the go-to, which, you know, again, if we look at it from both the archive side of things, Magnus Archives, with the corruption and the way that the desolation, not the corruption, the desolation and the way that it burns everything. And then we look at alchemy and the flame that purifies, the flame that burns out the impurities. There's some really interesting ways to look at this. Even if we tie in the theology from last episode with the fire and the fuller's flame, right? In the biblical sense of the fire burns out the impurities and burns away the sin. There's a lot that really, there's a whole lot going on, and there's like 3 more clues we need to make it all make sense. But one of them I think we might have gotten in this episode, and I'm gonna make a case for that. So Gwen goes to meet Inksoul, and that's the majority of this episode, right? That's the majority of this, where we get to see the process of Gwen offering an external to be an external. We get Inksoul's story. We get Inksoul talking about how they're changing and how they don't know why. They don't know what's happened to them. We get the description of Inksoul talking about how much they like the look, right? Which is feeding off of the fear. And so, just as we talked about with Needles, with Bonzo, with Lady Mowbray, there is a very good chance that externals are a type of avatar, right? Specifically, at one point, Gwen mentions that maybe Inksoul made contact with some power and it changed them. Some type of version of avatar, right? But maybe not the same as the version we're used to. Maybe slightly different. Maybe in a different way, you know? When Gwen brings up external, Inksoul asks to what? Your department? Society? The world? And Gwen says, maybe all of them? So, if we tie this in with last week, where we now have the theory that Augustus Magnus bound the fear somehow when they came to this universe at the end of Archives, right? What if they are still technically external entities, but they're bound, and you can still make contact with an aspect of the bound entities? And so, that is why Inksoul found... Because I talked about burning earlier, Inksoul found this power through the Oscar Jarrett tattoos, which didn't decay, and specifically the one that moved Inksoul and made Inksoul decide to copy Oscar Jarrett was the one of the sun. Sun, of course, represents fire, and maybe most importantly when we talk about the sun, in alchemical and hermetic traditions, specifically in alchemy and hermeticism, the sun can represent gold. The sun can represent sulfur. Sulfur is the one of the main 3, the triumph of alchemy, that is not represented in the Magnus Protocol logo, where we have salt and mercury. Sulfur is the one that so often is represented with fire. Could it be it's not in the logo because it instead is what they do? It is the process of burning out the enemy. It is the protocol itself. There's a lot, okay? Just immediately dove down this rabbit hole of, hey, Inksoul saw that sun and it impacted them. And was that when they made the connection to sulfur? And in this universe, is sulfur the fire of the desolation? I'm glad in some ways that we have a break, because it means I get to go back and look at previous episodes and try to find more connections like this. I'm not glad because of what happens at the end of this episode. We're going to get to that. Also, in this Oscar Jarrett tattoo, there was, I'm trying to find the exact phrasing here. I've lost place because I got excited. a network of cross-hatched lines that immediately made me think of the spiral, right? Fractals. That feels like that's going to be important. That in that Oscar Jarrett, there are cross-hatched lines that are an important call out there. That's not just something that would come up, you know? Specifically, in the center of the sun. Was that crosshatch lines as in the spiral, or was that crosshatch lines more like the logo of the Magnus protocol, of the OIAR, with the diamond patterns in there? We're going to have to find out more as we go, because we need more information. We also get a little bit about Inksoul themselves, about, their desire to be important, their desire to be better than everyone else, and how that drove them ever upwards, how people were concerned about them, but all they could do was continue this rise. And then they began to tattoo other people with these copies of the Oscar Jarretts. And the first one on a poor man named Harry, Inksoul could smell the burning skin, and Harry complained that it felt like his shoulder was on fire, and then staggered outside, and then later on died in a house fire. Because as we can see, the tattoos destroy. They take whatever and they destroy. We already know that from previous episodes, which again makes me feel like it could be tied to the desolation. It could be corruption, right? The tattoos are corrupting them, but I feel like it could, and again, even those brackets, those boxes that I put information in my brain are probably not correct anymore. And instead, is it just this is the touch of sulfur? And when we get into sulfur, its coloration in alchemy is yellow. Coloration in real life is yellow as well. But that leads us into like the king in yellow. I don't know. I'm realizing now in a very like post state that I think I wasn't wearing my headphones when I started recording this, and I am now. Don't worry about it. It's fine. We're just going to keep going. From there, they tried to go back to their own style, but they always wound up going back to the Oscar Jarretts until they found a new style as the ink flows out of them and onto others as they complete whatever change into an external that they had started on. And again, at some point, started having to feed on the terror, bringing people to warehouses to work on them. Inksoul's working on a dead body here, just practicing, I guess. Maybe just for the fun of it, who knows. But Gwen decides to be Gwen, and this is not the place to be Gwen. Because Gwen gets a little snippy with Inksoul and basically says, hey, you know this is a good deal. I don't have to explain to you why it's such a good deal. You have all the ink you need. Just write your name down and let's be done with it. And Inksoul says, you want some ink? And then, as far as we understand it, Gwen runs away. And so again, this is not a long episode comparatively. Like last week, we had so much to talk about that we were here for like 30 minutes. But there is still really interesting stuff in here. And the fact that even if we separate the alchemy stuff, the fact that the tattoos come alive of their own volition, it seems almost, that it seems like they drain something from someone to become real, that's crazy cool. It could open up a lot of options. And again, is it tied into the woman that drowned, that ran into Alice? Because Oscar Jarrett had a tattoo of something moving underwater. The tattoos come alive. And I wonder if the tattoos are just an outlet for the fear, or if they're a specific fear themselves, or if at this point the fear is just a power source for them, and it doesn't really have anything to do with your own natural fears. And instead it's more of, this is the state of the world. Because an important thing in alchemy are the laws of reality, right? The alchemical laws that everything is bound by. The most famous one, I guess, that people know is the law of equivalent exchange, right? But have the fears become the laws? Are they now a part of the very world itself? And if we go by the theory that Albertus Magnus bound them with alchemy to be able to do the things that he theoretically wanted to do. Have they now just been bound to all of this reality? Or could they still be excised, and could they still be separated out? If alchemy is the outlet, is that why the protocol works? If it's just fire, or is there more to it than that? Is fire just a favorite tool of an external that happens to work with GSR, now Starkwell? There's so many questions. We have so much to theorize on, and we've been given way more answers than I thought we would have gotten in the first 20 episodes. Maybe if I had been listening to archives this way, I would have felt the same way at episode 20, but I don't think so. I think archives still kind of felt like disparate stories, even though it was starting to build into something really good. And don't get me wrong, it was already great from episode 1. If you go back and watch my very first season review, Magnus Archives grabbed me from episode 1. I do feel like we know more than we did then, but it's also possible we don't realize how much we don't know. And so I'm loving it. I hope you are too. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Are there any details that I missed here? I'm definitely trying to look at things more from the alchemical swing now, which means that there are probably some more obvious things that I am missing. Sutherland McDonald gets mentioned here as well, the teacher of Oscar Jarrett, and I feel like that's going to be important, so I just wanted to call that out. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And yeah, expect in the next coming weeks. It might not be next week. It might be the week after. It depends on how much research I have to do to be able to roll that video out. But expect a video on either the ARG and then another video on alchemy, or a video on alchemy and then another video on the ARG, because I think it's going to be a little too big to try and tackle in one video. But we'll see. I'm excited. Magnus Protocol will come back in a few weeks, and we will find out what happens to Gwyn. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And until next time, I've been Trey. This has been The Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum. The Magnus Protocol. Best of luck.